Welcome to episode 14 of Norse Myths, Legends, and Folktales. My name is MyLinda, Butterworth, and today we continue with part 2 of how Loki got his lips sewed shut in the myth of the treasures of the gods. Leaving Loki with a horn full of mead, and with orders only to wait, Eitri and Brokk stumped across the hall and through an arch into the rocky alcove that was their smithy. At once Brokk began to pile wood onto the furnace, while Eitri hammered and rolled a length of gold wire and cut it into hundreds of short pieces. Then Eitri laid a pigskin on the roaring fire and said to Brokk, "Pump the bellows now. Whatever happens, keep pumping until I pull this treasure out of the forge." A little while after Eitri had walked out of the smithy, a fly alighted on Brock's leathery hand. It stung him. Brokk glanced back, but did not pause. He kept pumping the bellows. And when Eitri returned, he pulled Gullinbursti out of the forge, a boar with bristles of gold. Now Eitri picked a great block of unflawed gold. He heated the metal until it was glowing and malleable. Then he hammered it into shape and put it into the furnace. "Pump the bellows now," said Eitri. "Whatever happens, keep pumping until I pull this treasure out of the forge." A little while after Eitri had left the smithy, the same fly returned and settled on Brock's neck. It stung him twice as sharply as before. Brokk winced and flinched, but he did not pause. He kept pumping the bellows, and when Eitri returned, he took Draupnir out of the forge, an arm-ring of solid gold. Now Eitri humped a great hunk of iron across the smithy and into the furnace. He heated it and hammered it. He struck at it and shaped it. He reshaped it. He tapped and tapped at it. His body ached. He streamed with sweat, and when he was ready, his head and heart were both banging with his own efforts. "Pump the bellows now," said Eitri. "It will all be wrecked if you stop pumping." Very soon after, Eitri had walked wearily out of the smithy and looked around for their visitor. The fly buzzed through the arch and into the alcove. This time it settled between Brock's eyes, and at once it stung him on both eyelids. The dwarf was blinded with blood. He could not see what he was doing, and for a moment he took his hand off the bellows so that they caught their breath to brush the fly off their forehead and the blood out of his eyes. Then the shape-changer Loki, for the fly was none other, returned to his waiting place with his horn of mead. At this moment, Eitri hurried back into the smithy. "What has happened?" he shouted. He peered into the furnace. "So nearly," he said. He peered into the flames again, and his glittering gray eyes did not reflect them. "So very nearly spoiled." Then Eitri pulled from the forge an iron hammer, massive and finely forged, but rather short in the handle. He called it Mjolnir. Eitri and Brokk stared at it. They stared at each other. They slowly nodded. "Take this hammer and this ring and this boar," said Eitri. "Tell the gods the mysteries of their treasures. Go with Loki to Asgard and claim that schemer's head." Brokk and Eitri walked out of the alcove and found the sly one, the shape-changer, waiting for them, smiling. He cast an eye over their 3 treasures. "Ready?" he said. Loki and Brokk made their way slowly across the shining fields of Asgard, laden with their treasures. Word of their coming ran ahead of them, and they were met in Gladsheim by all the gods, sitting in their high places. Loki at once told of his visit to the world of the dwarves, and boasted that he had been able to exploit the dwarves' envy and greed to secure 6 gifts for the gods. "Talk while you can," said Brokk. Soon you'll have no tongue. It was agreed that Odin and Thor and Freyr should decide whether Eitri or the sons of Ivaldi were the finer smiths, and Loki began to display his treasures. "This spear," he said, "is for you, Odin. It is Gungnir. It differs from other spears in this way: it never misses its mark." The father of battle took the spear and raised it and looked around the hall. Nobody could withstand his terrible gaze. "You may want to use it," Loki said, "to stir up warfare in the world of men." Then Loki turned to Freyr. "This vessel is for you, Freyr. It is Skidbaldnir. As you can see, it's large enough to hold all the gods fully armed. As soon as you hoist its sail, a breeze will spring up and fill it, and urge the boat forward. But when you have no need of it, you can take it apart." Loki swiftly dismasted and dismantled the boat until the pieces were together no larger than a piece of cloth. "You can fold it up like this," said Loki, "and put it in your purse." "My third gift," said the schemer, "I owe to you, Sif." He showed the skein of flowing golden hair to the goddess. "As soon as you lift this to your head, it will root and grow. You'll be no less beautiful than you were before." Thor's wife took the hair from Loki. She fingered it. She turned it over and over, and then she slowly raised it to her head. There was a shout of joy in Gladsheim. It was just as Loki said. Now Brokk produced his gifts. "This gold arm ring is for you, Odin," he said. "It is Draupnir. There is a little more to it than it seems. 8 rings of its own weight will drop from it on every 9th night." Then Brokk turned to Freyr. "This boar is for you. It is Gullinbursti. He can charge over earth, air, and sea alike, and no horse can keep up with him. And no matter where he goes, running through the night or plunging into the gloom under all the worlds, he'll always be surrounded by bright light. He carries it himself, because his bristles shine in the dark." "My third treasure," said Brokk, "is for you, Thor. This is the hammer Mjolnir. You can use it against anything, and use it with all your strength. Nothing can even break it." The storm god eagerly grasped the hammer and listened. "Even if you hurl it, you'll never lose it. No matter how far you fling it, it will always return to your hand. And should you need to hide it, you can make it small enough to tuck inside your shirt." All the gods stared at Mjolnir, astounded, and knew what powerful magic must have gone into its making. "It has only one small flaw," said Brokk. "Not that it matters. Its handle is rather short." Odin and Thor and Freyr wasted no time in giving their answers. All three were of one mind that, wondrous though all the treasures were, the hammer Mjolnir was the most valuable, because it alone could guard the gods against the giants. "You, Brokk," said Odin, "have won the wager." "Loki's head!" shouted Brokk. "Wait!" cried Loki. "What would you do with my head? I'll give you its weight in gold instead." "There's no future in that," said Brokk, "and no future for you." The gods of Gladsheim laughed to see the trickster cornered. "Well," said Loki slowly, "well, catch me then." He darted through the doors of the hall and made off as fast as he could. By the time Brokk had made a move to stop him, the sky traveler was already well on his way, wearing his shoes with which he could fly over land and water. The gods of Gladsheim laughed all the louder. "If you have in honor, you'll help me," shrieked the dwarf. "Thor, help me!" Thor was in no mood to see Brokk humiliated. He leaped up from his high seat and stormed out of Gladsheim. The gods and Brokk waited, and after a while Thor returned, dragging Loki after him. "Not so fast," said Loki, raising a hand as Brokk started towards him. "It is true you have a claim on my head, but of course you can't have any parts of my neck." The gods grinned and nodded, and Brokk saw that Loki had got the better of him. "In that case," said Brokk, "since your head is mine, at least I'll stop your sweet talk. I'll sew your lips together." Loki shrugged his shoulders. "Nothing but fine words," he said. Brokk unwound a thong from round his waist and tied it to skewer Loki's lips with his knife. That was no good. Sharp as the point was, the dwarf could not even draw a drop of blood. "I could certainly do with my brother's awl," said Brokk. No sooner had he spoken than Eitri's awl lay at his feet. Brokk picked it up, and it provided sharp enough to pierce Loki's lips. The dwarf drew the leather thong through the holes and sewed up the trickster's mouth. Loki ran out of Gladsheim. He ripped the thong out through the holes and yelped at the pain of it. Then for some while the schemer stood listening to the hum inside the hall, the hive of happiness. He began to dream of revenge, and slowly his lips curled into a twisted smile. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.